Welcome back to another episode of the Arbitrage.Run show. Surprise, we got Facundo back. Nobody expected this. I didn't either, but we didn't get to everything on the last show, and we certainly didn't expect you to come back on, Facundo, to get to some of this stuff. But you listened to, because you care so much about your job and Zed, you digest all of the content that gets created out there, and so you listen to pretty much every one of Dan Shan's spaces and our shows and a bunch of other content that's created out there. You watched the show with Kevin, listened to the show, the Twitter Spaces with Kevin last week, and you had some thoughts on that stuff that really kind of fits in with some of the topics that we didn't get to. So you volunteered to come back on. We're so appreciative, and I think everybody from the community will be as well. So there's your intro, Facundo. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, sometimes I cannot just watch the shows live and I listen to recordings, right? And I just happen to listen to a recording of Dan's and Kane's show one-on-one, besides all the Kingpin interrupting, right?
Yeah, he was obnoxious, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, man, that guy won't shut up. And yeah, we just happened to do the recording first, and so many of the topics were actually overlapping. And I just on the chat we have out when we contact each other, I was like, guys, I can't believe I just listened to this. So many of the concepts resonate, right? Like things about the nature of printing being just inflationary, and like so many of the answers to the balance of the ecosystem just relaying on this idea of a circular kind of life cycle for horses, right? So
yeah, well, yeah. If we had the chance, we would talk to you every day, Facundo. We appreciate it. Let's start with the question, though, that we didn't get to, and then kind of tie it into the some of the Twitter Spaces stuff. And by the way, if you haven't listened to Dan Chan's Twitter Spaces that featured Kevin last week, go out and check it out, because it's must-listen material. Kevin, Dan put a lot of questions on you, some good, insightful questions, and you had a lot of good responses, I thought. But Facundo, here was another question from Twitter that we didn't get to on last week's show. So Emerald Hills was asking if you can provide any more insight on aging regarding kind of the estimated number of races. I don't know how specific you can get on any of this stuff, how many different tiers of aging there's going to be. You mentioned on the last show refactoring stamina, and I don't know if you can get a little bit more in detail on what that's going to look like. But I think the spirit of this question, and I think he ended the question by saying it's really difficult to make any purchases right now without knowing a little bit more about this stuff. And that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, definitely, in terms of what we discussed around what's kind of that shelf life of horses, right, moving forward, which is going to really be the key of the experiment of putting a horse or buying a horse, right? So that's definitely part of I understand the question, right? Estimated numbers, yeah, I can't really give you that. That's why when we had this question is what's the experience, and walk back from there, right? Now, that experience that I discussed about, maybe it takes you a month or 2 months to score a horse, depending if you're trading XP or not. And then another couple of months to maybe get it to a max potential, and then maybe another couple of months to kind of get it aged to a point where you just don't race it every day, and the experience with that horse is kind of through, and you're moving on to the next generation of a bloodline that you're trying to work on, or whatever it is, right? That's your strategy on a meta level. In terms of stamina, and this is why this is related to that, okay, a couple of months, what that does mean in terms of race volume, right? Since we're doing it based on the number of races. We're definitely thinking of toning down on this initial release of stamina, the amount of just races that you can run on a daily basis, right? Because I know, Ken, you told me you're the specialist here. If you really time it with your sleep patterns and everything, how many races you can get out of a horse on a 18, 20? What's your best?
I think 18 is like the true max. We are lucky to get like 12, because what happens is you race first thing in the morning, but those don't pop instantly. So you maybe get 5 in the morning where you can double dip. So you get those 5 and you get 7, 8 later that night.
I think Wagme's getting 18.
18, but like not all horses can race 8 or 9 times before going to 89. Like I'd say the majority of my horses only get 8. So even if you double that, you're at 16. So yeah, I don't know. I'd say 10 to 12 is our average. Some get 16 to 18.
Right. Which in a sense, it also creates some uneven opportunities for those who have more time versus those who don't have much time, right? And we keep discussing this experience about Zed, and we're going to get to some of the questions. I really like some of the things you said about what's the fun part of Zed and what's like the grind that needs to get you to the fun. And how that really resonated with how we think about this in a way and where we're going to get to. our thinking at this moment is that that type of max that you're discussing is maybe 8, maybe 12, or not much more than that. Should be what the stamina refactor, when we release that, should look like for the average player, right? You have a bar with like maybe 10, 12 points, and you can regenerate the entire bar throughout the day, right? That also means that we need formats that support the ability to, let's say, compromise some of that stamina all at once, right? Which is also part of what we discussed about what does the tournament format or the racing format serve the player as a purpose, right? And going into, for instance, sit and goes would really give you that chance of like saying, okay, this horse today is going to run these 3 sit and goes, and I can just, leave him scheduled, let's say, and that's going to take most of his stamina away, and that's fine, right? I don't need to be feeling 9 races or whatever the amount of each race on the sit and goes are, right? Because there could be 2 rounds sit and goes as well. So that's the direction, right? It's not 20 or whichever amount the max is of races. It's and that's at no aging, right? So then as aging starts hitting, maybe instead of like 12 a day, which means kind of regenerating a point every 2 hours, you go to 3 hours and then to 4. So it's like 12, 8, 6, and so on, right? And again, we're thinking it now from a point of view of like, okay, based on whichever the balancing of stamina is when we release it, the refactor that we're doing before aging to allow for aging to be more transparent, because there's also some of these unnecessary nuance on the current stamina system where you just race slower under a certain threshold, like it affects your racing skill, but it's actually a feature that no one uses. Like it literally, like I think 0.2 of all races every day are run by horses under the stamina threshold, right? Which, so it's literally one of those unnecessary choices that no one makes because it's a damn choice. Like, why would you do that, right? It's not an interesting choice to run a horse unless you're trying to, of course, but stats of that horse. If you're on it, we're on to you. But yeah, we need to make sense of the whole thing and design all the systems in conjunction. So the amount of races is more based on what the experience we want for a horse to be.
I think
and we're thinking in terms of time.
I think what you were saying about like sit and goes, it'd be really interesting just to have like stamina coins or whatever as like a currency to enter that sit and go, where it's like, all right, this is a 3 race max sit and go. You got to have 3, and you literally just take the 3 away when they enter. That would limit it. And maybe you lose first round, but that's still going to cost you 3 stamina. So you're like, that's another time currency we could add on top of the dollar. I think my other comment on stamina and why I'd be a proponent of this, like with a 2-hour or 4-hour regeneration, I think that's just much better for the user than the 12-hour race roll off. Like for example, right? You could run your full 10 races, however many there are, and just knock them out in the morning. But then you could still be racing 3 hours later with one more race and just kind of keep doing that all day. Or you could take the more passive approach, and instead of having to race exactly 12 hours later so you can double dip and optimize, you just wait for your bar to fill all the way back up over the course of like 20 hours, and you're just the same. So it's like 2 strategies, racing less frequently throughout the day or more frequently all at once, that gets you to the same endpoint. Whereas right now, it's just really one strategy that works, and that is double dipping in the morning and at night, or else you're losing ground. So I like the versatility of this more frequent
Choices.
One race regeneration.
Choices.
Yes.
We need players to make choices and that be the layer in which good players differentiate themselves from bad players, right? That's how this works. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that thinking. And yeah, sit and goes is kind of going to be part of that, because there's been good. I mean, there's always good and bad feedback for everything we do, of course. I mean, all feedback is good. Some it's critical, some it's supportive. That's what I meant. Around some of the tournament things we've been trying with the new formats and the new things that we've been trying on tournaments to keep it interesting and change how the dynamic works. We have a mixed view because we of course love player engagement and seeing everyone really go into the systems and do their best at it. But at the same time, it creates and this is also on the data, you could see it yourself, it creates distortions on the incentive structure that hurt the entire ecosystem in terms of how they drive volume away from formats or price points to a more singular option again, because there's like the most optimal choice. That's the maximum, the best play every single time, which doesn't do what we wanted to do for the ecosystem in a way, right? That's why also sit and goes in terms of demand, on-demand type of engagements serve the experience better of what it really should be, the experience of running a tournament, because it's like you said, Kevin, in terms of like, and this is one of the things that I mentioned before, right, that really resonated with me. What's the best part of ZED, right? Especially when it comes to a tournament experience. Getting the horse on the QFs as scheduled and just waiting and prepping to see it. And if you run a stream, like, boom, go live on that moment and get people excited. That's what it is, right? So the faster and more often we can get to that point, this is not rocket science, right? It's just about giving people what they want in a sense, right? So yeah, I'm not 100% on it's a great thing what the tournaments are and in their format, and like, if that shouldn't be if our strategy shouldn't be more about what we were discussing the other time about the treasury is more about Class 1 Premier. It's more about the big type ticket events, the big high status type events, right? So yeah, a lot of thoughts about that and why we need to get sit and goes. And that's why they're on kind of a short-term roadmap, right? We want to get sit and goes hopefully out end of Q1, alongside aging, to give more of a rounded experience. So we're doing our best to get all of those things to coincide at that end of Q1 point in time.
We'll take a quick tangent here on the sit and goes then and circle back to this aging discussion. So in this first rendition of sit and goes that you're talking about trying to get out by the end of Q1, would that come with this customization that people are kind of dying for, where they can create their own sit and go with, whether it's just, I don't know, number of horses or what level of customization, but I think that customizability where the player can create their own one is something that people have wanted for a long time. Is that going to come in version 1? Is that going to come later this year? Is that never going to come? What are you thinking?
No, it's definitely going to come in the sense of what we discussed last week around, it's part of the vision 100% on a sense of like the platform stage, right? We're trying to finalize that game stage, which just sets the foundations for the available formats, strategies, what the main components of the game work together like. Once we're through that phase, the next phase is the platform stage, handling the keys of content creation to the community. Like, if you go to a classical type Web 2 development studio that develops entertainment in the form of video games, once a game goes into kind of the only live ops phase, when all the main features have been developed already and released, right? And some of that happens after the initial release of the game. But after that, the live operation point comes when you just scale down teams and the only thing you do is produce content to keep people engaged on type of new competitions where they can compete for, I don't know, imagine we would do tournaments for Genesis Horse or whatever it is. Web3 gives us the opportunity to not have to do this and actually create an ecosystem where players can do that for themselves, for players, by players, right? Instead of us needing to dictate what's the format that is going to be playing this week, what's the, so that's definitely part of the vision in the sense of like, if you're trying to develop a product on Web3 with a new technology, you're always thinking of like, okay, I've developed this type of product for a long time with a different technology. What's that the new technology bring into account that we can exploit? And that's definitely part of it. So 100% part of the vision. Now, is it part intrinsically of the phase in which we're on right now, of the developing the game to its full basic loop, right? Where you can breed a horse, run it, race it, breed, and the whole discussion about the number of races. Some of the stats around horses are interesting, right? There's like a very few horses that get run over a few hundred races, right? Because they're like, most of them are not worth it, right? Like, that's how this works, right? Like, it's not a huge amount of horses that get run beyond the certain couple of few hundred races, right? So, for instance, a horse aging at a couple thousand, like, let's say if there's 10 races a day, 6 months is like what? 1,800, 1,900 races, whatever it is, right? Like, not so many horses get there, right? And all the effects of this into how the horses slot themselves into different price formats. If you have only 2,000 races or 3,000 races, or maybe 4,000 races before a horse you really start feeling the agent. Maybe it's not done, but you really start feeling it. You go from racing a horse every day and playing with it every day to playing maybe once a day or once every couple of days, right? And maybe there's more room even for the horse to keep aging, but at that point where the game, the horse moves out kind of your daily cycle of your stable, maybe at that point, there's a very small percentage of horses that even get there, right? Unpaid profitably, right? Which is really the question behind how much should I value a particular horse, right? And be willing to maybe pay for it on the secondary market, right? Or pay a breeding fee. So yeah.
So what was do you have like an astrologic cycle that you can point us to of when the customized sit and goes are going to be available?
My hope is that based on our strategy around really getting to a place by the end of Q1, start of Q2, of really start bringing in new players and saying, hey, we have a game that you can play, and if you like it, you can stay, right? And like look at the vision of the platform and think long-term for it, right? But you need to be engaged by the game. Then we can start moving in that direction, right? So depending on where we land with the game phase around, mid towards Q3 of this year, the platform stage might start as soon as Q4 of this year, right? And of course, we should probably start with the things that deliver most of the value first. Around people really want the ability, right? But like if we've had by that time 6 months of running sit and goes, then we know which formats are the things that people like, what things would like to be customized, right? We have a bunch of experience around what the product should really look like before we add that layer, because we also believe that there needs to be an ownership layer that comes with that type of functionality, right? We don't believe that like any new user that just joins trying to learn the game should be able to go like, oh, I'm creating races, I'm populating either a lobby or a multiplayer separation of the lobby with races. That people's like, what is this? What is this sit and go? This makes no sense, right? Like we probably will use again the technology in our favor to say, there's an ownership layer where you can own certain NFTs, which are literal tracks, let's say, at distances or formats or whatever it is that allow you to run these races or custom tournaments, right? You will probably be able to do both, right? Both just normal paids and sit and goes. So yeah, I would say probably towards the end of this year, we can start developing that based on the success of our plan and how we can keep executing our current plan and not need to pivot or alter, change majorly, right? We're always tweaking, but not a huge pivot of the product.
Do you envision like sit and go tournament races to get their XP boosted relative to like what we currently see with tournament races? Or do you want it to be, are you doing sit and goes that's at the expense of grinding up your horse level wise? Because right now, like tournaments are just, they don't give you XP really. It's kind of a waste of stamina for that.
The thing with XP, guys, is that it's really what we're experiencing now with XP is not the experience of XP. The experience of XP is really going to be about there's a certain amount of time that I need to invest on an asset to reach a certain degree. If I want to do it faster or sooner, I'm going to be able to take choices around that, trade XP or whatever. It's not going to be the arms race that it is now because our user base has optimized the game to the extreme, right? Like we have a reduced user base now, those who really understood ZED and completely dictated. And I get it, it's a bit of an arms race, right? Now, it's only as such in the sense where the grind right now is very long term because we want it to be very conservative because there's no aging in the product, right? When imagine that would be much faster. Imagine, like I said, in 6 months you would like get to an aged horse and you will be able to go level up from bottom of class maybe to top of a class 2, 401 to 500 in 6 months, and you're there for a time until that horse is kind of done and you move to the next. Like XP wouldn't be such a drama, right? Of like, oh, okay, this horse is lapping me. Okay, that horse is going to move off the level bracket really fast, and I'm going to have other horses around me, right, with the similar level. That like the movement around classes and the, what I mentioned in some of the discussions on Twitter around. Now there's a strategy around time. Like you get a horse, you breed it. It doesn't work very well on the 501 to 525s. You can just wait a bit and try it again in a month and a half. And maybe it's great versus that competition that, So we need to understand these things and how they're actually going to work. Like the factor that time is part of the equation completely changes the game that we're going to be playing in 6 months, right? And aging is part of that as well. So once the XP accelerates, once you can actually park a horse strategically, and you just need to wait maybe a couple of weeks before the beginning of class 1 segmentation, horses just are on the next bracket, like it's that fast. There's going to be much more choices and much more thinking to be made. And this is, you see how this would be much less of a discussion and much less important. I know I lost 5 levels versus, I understand you guys at the top. I know Ranjo are top, like all those horses, it's a different story and they're like legends on their own, etc. But like, it won't be such a thing. Oh, he's 5 levels, whatever. Oh, he dropped off the bracket. Haha. I'm gonna, dominate the next 5 levels until 525 now that he's gone. Whatever. Right? It's a different game. And the experience is gonna be the skill that has made some stables great, right? About determining which are the horses that are good and that you should work on versus the horses that you should buy, or it's going to be much more of a day-to-day thing, and you'll need to utilize it much more often because the stock of horses will be changing all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that's to a certain degree going to be a relief to hear for a lot of people, because they are some of the more casual players that maybe invested in these top end horses. I think they feel that heat of like, yeah, I've just lost a ton of level. Like, what's the point anymore? And so the idea that that's not actually the vision and that's not how it's going to end up playing out, I think is a positive. So circling back, Facundo, to the aging discussion and the spaces that Kevin was on with Dan Shan. Regarding I think a lot of that discussion was about 1.0s and them aging out. And I think one really good question that Dan asked on that was, what's the point of breeding right now? When even like the best of the best 3.0s, if we want to call Super Seed, there's only been 2 of the super breeds. I think there's 11 now that have raced, but Super Seed being like the best of the 3.0s can't even compete with that top tier. So it's demoralizing, right? For people to be breeding and like not have a chance to really be competitive. I think that was a lot of the discussion that went on that spaces. So what's your answer to what's the point of breeding right now?
I would first say that saying Super C is the best of the 3.0s. It's a reach. That's your opinion.
Super dud, right?
I know what data you're basing. Super dud is like maybe bottom of the barrel. We'll see. There's like 11 super breeds for this main. I'm so excited to see what happens.
So far,
right? Now,
so far.
Now, it really comes down to the discussion around the inflationary nature of breeding and we also discussed this last week around like why you play racing game, because you want to be the fastest. I mean, someone else owns the fastest horse. It's not kind of fun, right? Like how you get there. Power creep wasn't the answer. Believe me, it was not heading in the direction we wanted to go. Once we are able to really either age out or segment, and this is some of the things we want to discuss around breeding 3.0 breed paid conditionals and maybe tournaments. We still have reservations out if we want to keep running tournaments this often or on this level on a daily basis, right? Things are going to be really different. And there are stopgap solutions like maybe the paid conditionals, but in a true sense, that's the solution that we're thinking about. So the experience goes from, dang, man, like, I don't know, race at Boom or whatever horse it's on every one of my races, to, wow, man, I was on a race with Race at Boom. Can you believe? Like, imagine new players coming and finding the legend horses in the races when they can race once a week, and you just randomly drop it on one or drop it on a tournament. So the experience goes from like, oh, man, chasing that race, I need to race this horse, right? It won't just age out forever. To, oh, wow, I found one. I was actually on a race with it. I was like lucky, right? And maybe sometimes, anything can happen in one particular race when the sample sizes are not large. I stole a podium on the race or whatever, or I flamed or whatever. So that's how it changes the equation. Now, of course, there's a lot of ecosystem depth, guys, and how do we solve it tomorrow? Oh, let's put out optional retirement. Let's see all the 1.0 happy owners go willingly retire those horses for the good of the ecosystem. It's not gonna happen, right? And we can't just go and say like, okay, well, these horses are now aged out, right? Tomorrow, bam, like, so there is no. It's kind of that Churchill address, right? Guys, I can only promise you sweat, toil, tears, and blood. Like it's gonna take us some time to get the ecosystem into a healthy shape where newcomers are willing to say, oh, that's an ecosystem where I want to enter because I feel there's opportunities for me, right? Like things are really tight. So, and all these debt of like 1.0 breathing, that was like really out there. And then 0.2 in 2.0 in many senses. It's going to take some time. So Stopgap Solutions bring 3.0 paids. I think it's a great start because it offers on the day-to-day like at least a whole new experience on the ability to run paids, right? What was your answer, Kevin, when Dan actually asked you literally if tomorrow all 2.0s and 1.0s are like dead or retired or whatever? Is breeding 3.0 so terrible in terms of like maintaining the promises of Genesis horses and at the same time having an ecosystem that players can have fun in like over time?
Yeah, I was saying I think 3.0 works a lot better apples to apples against 3.0. And then like there is a Genesis buff. I mean, I think that will be felt a lot more when you're not racing these variants beasts that just can't be created anymore. So I was optimistic that even if you had a 3.0 only class or however you want to do that, you would immediately feel the benefits of that apples to apples racing.
Yeah. If breeding is inflationary, bring 3.0 conditionals in a way are like, okay, we're changing the name of the currency and starting a new one, right? It's like it restores the ability to actually access opportunities inside that ecosystem through breeding. It makes breeding in many senses viable again, right? And of course, the aging question and the incentives question, the long term of what happens to all these 2.0s and 1.0s, there's a lot of thoughts around how we can add more value to horses as they age out. And there's, of course, the Genesis, non-Genesis discussion, right? Around, is it more breed slots for bred horses before decay hits? Is that an option? Is it actually more weighting of current level in terms of pushing starting level of foals? Another option, right? Maybe a horse that's fully aged out takes the average between current level and starting level to influence the starting level of the foal instead of the starting level of the horse. I don't know. Like we've discussed a bunch of different options to see what would be the right level of incentive to keep the value as much. It's really a redistribution, right, from the breeding loop into the racing and then back into the breeding. So there's options that we've discussed, for like aging 1.1, maybe let's call it, as those generations of horses start aging. How can some of that value be transported into the retired age when they can only race a little? So yeah, there's a few thoughts there.
This is kind of random, but are there thoughts about when a horse gets to level 700 to like make it feel more like an accomplishment? Because I mean, that potentially may not be as much of a grind as it seems right now, but that should be celebrated. So like, is there any incentive you guys are thinking about where it could be like a skin or maybe an Evo boost for someone else in the stable? Like, is that on the roadmap?
I think there's easy things, and we've always discussed and that's kind of maybe related to the endgame loop question that you guys also asked me last week. I think there's many things, right? If we start actually directioning the treasury around, big ticket items, C1 Premier, quarterly cup for the top 100 horses by level per funnel or whatever it is, right? There's things that can be done in terms of that, right? Now, intrinsically, the reward needs to be on the engagement with the product. Okay, like it never can really move away from. This is the thing: getting the horses at 100 should be, in many senses, extremely fun, probably very engaging, community-wise, banter-wise, profit-wise, right? Type of experience. And in a sense, only a few legends should do it, and they should be like the thing to aspire to, and not the day-to-day of the experience, right? It's not like any horse kind of gets to 700. Right? And there's also, again, many of the things on the day-to-day of our ecosystem are really about current volume and the amount of users that we get engaging with the platform that will have a different feeling, right? Because when you have maybe 2,005 or 4,000 races on a horse before you really start feeling aging, maybe it's a killer horse. You want to enter it only $100 races, for instance. You cannot do that right now. Full honesty, guys. right? So these are the things that the ecosystem needs to get right. So these things are possible, but it needs to work in this way for it to happen, right? Otherwise, again, it goes going back to what I said a few minutes ago, of like what's the incentive to join an ecosystem in this state with so much debt, especially around the breeding cycle and the existing stock of horses. Right? As a new player, it's extremely challenging. Like, look at my P&L. It's really hard, especially if you don't have a bunch of ETH to think on it. Right? That's why we're trying to lower the bars of entry. Lending, just try the experience without having to buy even $5 horse. Right? XP trading will give opportunities to self fund. You really like the game and even can show a little bit of skill because it's more time efficient and more skillful you are. So step by step, I think we'll get there in terms of the health we need to make it work.
I really like that that idea of bringing some value back as they age, because I think that's another thing of these casual, I don't want to say casual players, people that were really into Zed and maybe invested, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now they're looking at these high value Genesis horses potentially aging out and are concerned about that, bringing value back to them when they do age, because it's a value detractor. You can't race it as much, they can't be as profitable. Yeah, it's good for the entire ecosystem, and we look at it as the rising tide raises all ships, but to bring back some sort of breeding boost, like you were discussing, when you hit age 1 or 2, or maybe just fully aged or something like that, to make them even more desirable in the stud farm, or their foals more desirable. I think that's cool. And then my other thought here, Facundo, on it. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the thing that we also need to keep into account, and exactly what you just said, that we're all of kind of missing the point, and this was also discussed, I think, on the Ancient Spaces with you, Kevin, is the current thinking of what that breeding value for Genesis horses is, depending on the Genesis horse, is very, very dependent on how many people are breeding. Massive, number one. And second, on this equation around aging. Imagine tomorrow we get rid of all 2.0s and 1.0s because, we all like, bam, hammer, they're all dead. Whatever. The Genesis, even 50% of the Genesis value goes up like a rocket to Saturn. It doesn't even stop at the moon, guys. It's like the value of the breeding potential of Genesis horses, who are eternal breeders in a way, in an ecosystem where horses phase out and the stock population is not completely out of control, it's just going to naturally go up a ton. And I actually think you said this, Kevin, or I don't know if Dan said it to you on the Ancient Spaces. And this is the problem, guys. The unhealth part of this ecosystem that we're discussing, of all the debt around the ecosystem, is what's tanking the prices of the valuation of breeding with a horse being worth it or not, right? If we're talking thousands of races, even paying what right now is the most expensive price on the breeding chart at Gen NAC, like the most if you go and spend the most buck on a breed on thousands of races, you should be more than able to make that back if the horse is worth it anything. If the horse is worth like whatever, right? Like that's it. That's the answer to that question. The breeding value will just naturally go up. This is the way. It's going to take time, but the step-back solutions will get us there.
Yeah, and if you've got 100,000 daily active users, which you keep stating as your mission, then you've only got what maximum possible legendary Nakamotos that can be created in any one cycle, I think, would be 2,000, which will never happen, right? But if you got 100,000 daily active users and that small supply of these horses that can produce at a high level and have a place to race is the key that you're mentioning. And that kind of ties into my next thought here, is these conditional 3.0 only breed paid races that you're talking about. I think that the question there for me then becomes like something that Souls Vanish talked about, right? Where the bar is constantly going to be moving, right? Because we've already got these 3.0 breeds that have been out for now 3 months and have been leveling up. And so the new ones are immediately at a disadvantage, even in these 3.0 conditional paid races. So it's something that Kevin and I have talked about to a large degree.
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
So I don't agree with that, because the thing is really about if we have right segmentation in terms of 525s, 550s, 575, even in class 1, if you breed a new horse, you're not racing against the 630s. That's just not a thing. And if you start at the bottom of class 2, versus a top of class 2 horse. Of course, there's a gap, but it's much tighter gap than class 1 and the ends of the distribution, right? Like, it's just not the way it works. This system will actually work for constant new generations of 3.0s. Let's imagine that there is no 1.0s and 2.0s, right? We don't need the conditions, just the normal constant population. Brewing a 510, it's okay, because you're going to be racing against 510s to 525s, 501s to 525s, and then 550s, and then 575s. So, you see my point?
Yeah, I see your point, Kevin. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it. Where like once you get more movement in the system with quicker leveling, everything's going to be expedited. Where you're not going to be facing Ducky Malin in a 526 to 550 for 200 races. Like right now, it'd be like, all right, she wins 5, she's out. So I think getting that movement and flexibility will make it more viable, because eventually the good 1.0s are just going to be top of class 1.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the thing that we had talked about, Kevin, is the segmenting it by time versus
like age.
Yes, well, so age, as you know, Facundo is kind of defining it here, is by number of races, and the issue with that, right, is that once this clock starts, we're all starting from 0, right? So these 3.0s that have been running for 3-4 months by the time that aging starts, maybe even more than that, have this advantage, right? So if it's a time-based 3.0 only, and it would, again, this is stopgap, right? It's until all of this sets into effect, right, Facundo? But having it time-based, yeah.
Do we pay that? This is what design that looks like, guys. You create unhealthy systems which are unsustainable over time. Not that far away from fiat currencies. You just create unhealthy systems, right? And then those it's like getting drunk. At first it feels great, right? But then when you're wasted, it doesn't feel so good, and you pay that the next day when you're like completely hungover, right? Like this is how this works.
So we're like 11 a.m. the next day drinking a Pedialyte right now. We're like, we feel like crap still, but we're on the up and up.
Yeah, I think that we have a concept and a product that it's still bleeding edge of what I've seen out there in terms of like everything, brand, presentation, excitement of the actual product. I played a bunch of our Web3 games. I didn't find of them much engagement or exciting. I think ZED gets you literally up from your chair. Like my first experience, when I bought like a class 4 exclusive NAC trash for like $250 or whatever, I remember I paid for it. I think I got a second on the Griffin, or maybe even a first on the Griffin of it. And I was just standing, like shouting at the monitor, like it's ZED special, right? So if we just get some basic things in place, I think we have a winner, right? Now, it's not going to be, again, it's going to be a little bit of sweat, toil, blood, and tears, right? So either on board for it and like are ready to like think long term, try to think 10 years into the future in the sense of like what it could be, like a world phenomenon, or it's very day to day, and the experience on the day to day. I mean, I felt it, right? I feel it on a daily basis when we discuss everything. Price entry fees, when Devil Labs were like the 525s, I think these were the most expensive ones, and all my donkeys were on 505, 510. I was like, it's kind of hard on me. It's a big one, right? $15 a pop. Like, okay. And making it the same price of the air conditioners was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, we all feel that on a daily basis, and we're trying the best to heal it without killing the patient, right? Because that's the quid of the question, right? It's like, how do we heal it without completely killing the patient, right? And get new blood in that sees from the outside and goes like, yeah, that looks like an ecosystem I want to be part of, where there's opportunities for everybody to, like, if you're a good player and you understand how to play the game, select the right races, breed the right horses, deploy your XP or your economy resources in the game, you can succeed and thrive and be a top stable. If that's not there, it's not going to work, fellas. So that's what we're building, right? A game that everyone wants and can play. The process from getting us from where we were to where we are, it's gonna be a little bit hard, but like, we believe in our vision, and we've done it before in the sense of like, throughout our careers as game development, we build things that people are willing to spend money to get entertainment from, without even any sort of chance of getting any money back, just for the sake of having fun, right? So we could at least get that part right? This has the added layer of the whole ecosystem of horse racing, right? So yeah, it's gonna take some time. We'll get there.
It's funny, Kevin, like we had this conversation with Keith like earlier in the week. I feel like this analogy of the knife wound, and you said that if they took the knife out too quick, that the patient will just bleed out and we'll all die. So it's funny that Facundo has the same analogy.
Are you watching us, Facundo? In our Discord?
I know, guys. I have no high level of technology. I couldn't be like hacking your webcam or anything like that, so don't worry. It's not me. It's probably someone else trying to get the arbitrage wasabi to see if they can dominate some of you guys out there.
Yeah, that's in Kevin. They need to cut him open and find it.
Yeah.
No knives, please.
Okay,
awesome. Let's wrap it up
5 minutes late.
Yeah,
guys.
We appreciate all the time. I'm sure everybody else in the community appreciates you spending the time. Thanks for doing all this. Thanks for being so invested in the product. And we can't wait to do it again. Take it easy, Facundo.
Thanks, Facundo.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.